Hello, and welcome to Life Diaries, a space where the pages of life open up, one story at a time. These are tales written by experience, spoken from the heart. Take a moment for yourself, and let's begin. Chloe, are you serious? Sophie's gaze eagerly latched onto her friend's face across the cafe table. I think we have a good reason to raise our glasses. A sly smile flickered across Chloe's lips, and she reached for the goblet of amber, noble liquid. The evening before, she had suggested Sophie meet for lunch. Her friend, a true hunter of other people's secrets and stories, agreed without the slightest hesitation. And there truly was a reason. Chloe coquettishly adjusted a strand of her black hair, showing off the new earrings sparkling in her ears. "Oh, I think I can guess what this is about," Sophie drawled knowingly, as if she had cracked a secret. "A new suitor, and by the looks of it, a very wealthy one." "You are remarkably observant," Chloe noted. A waiter silently placed their order before the girls and smiled almost imperceptibly. "Well, come on, tell me quickly, I can't stand it anymore," Sophie pleaded hotly as soon as the waiter had left. Chloe chuckled softly. It was her favorite pastime, to keep her friend in suspense and dole out information in stingy crumbs. For Sophie, that tireless magpie, it was genuine torture. "He has a restaurant business. He's rich, devilishly handsome, generous, gallant, and drives the latest model Lexus," Chloe rattled off as if shedding a burden. Sophie feigned a faint, dramatically slumping in her chair. Then, perking up, her eyes lit up with admiration, fixed on her friend. "Wow, what a catch! And have you, been together long?" She eagerly prepared to listen. "About a week, and we met, you won't believe it, in an ordinary flower shop." Chloe sipped from her glass. "I went in there to choose flowers for decorating a hall for a future order, and I came out with a bouquet of white roses meant just for me." "Simply amazing!" Sophie's delight was unrestrained. "At least show me a picture of this oligarch." Chloe rummaged in her handbag for her phone. A few deft movements, and soon the friends were leaning over a picture of a man. "The suit fits perfectly," Sophie concluded authoritatively. "You can tell it's not from Aunt Carol at the nearest hairdresser's. Well built. Not a man. Just the embodiment of a dream." Sophie sighed enviously, propping her cheek on her palm. She hadn't had anyone for about 6 months, and her last suitor didn't come close to having such a list of virtues. Suddenly, a spark of a long-forgotten thought flashed in her eyes. Sophie straightened up and, tilting her head with a shrewd look, glanced at Chloe. "But we both know there's always some flaw, even a small one, right?" The girls had long since learned, no matter how perfect a man seemed at first glance, he would inevitably have a flaw. It was an unwritten rule, an unbreakable pattern. A handsome biker turned out to be a hardened womanizer, a successful businessman, a heavy drinker, a charismatic boss, rude and stingy. The rule worked flawlessly. "There is a flaw," Chloe squeezed out with a sigh. "He's married." "Oh, pfft," Sophie waved it away dismissively. "That's nothing." The friends burst into laughter, and the clinking of their glasses echoed through the cafe. "Women have never been a hindrance to us," Chloe nodded in agreement. "Especially with a wife like that. Ugh!" The girl made a dramatic face, showing utter disdain for the presumably unknown rival. "No manicure, no hairstyle, sits at home, gotten fat. In short, just some frump, that's all." "Even so," the gossipy friend exclaimed. "Let's look her up." Chloe ran a finger with a shiny red nail across her smartphone screen, and soon before the eyes of the two girls appeared a photo of a woman clearly over 40, with a simple haircut, in an ordinary business suit and blouse. "Does she work as a teacher or an accountant?" Sophie snorted with laughter. "Seriously, Such a handsome man is married to this misunderstanding? Are you sure? Sure, and it's for the best. Chloe blew a strand of hair out of her eyes. Look at me and her, at her and me. Any fool can see who a normal guy would rather be with. Sophie surveyed her friend with a critical eye. It's not even interesting to steal someone like that. Chloe yawned. She also looks about 7 years older than him. He probably married her as a gray mouse for appearances, and she's happy to sit at home and forgive him everything. I see through women like that. Ready to wait just as long as he comes home to sleep, right? Sophie drawled, finishing her wine. But you're planning to make it so he doesn't even come home to her in the end? How will the poor gray mouse survive that? The friends burst into laughter. Her fingers felt the cool surface of the leather steering wheel pleasantly. A special, expensive scent hung in the cabin. And even if the car belonged to his wife on paper, that was just in the vehicle registration and insurance. The ladies wouldn't rummage through his glove compartment checking papers, would they? The mere fact that George was driving a premium foreign car was enough for them. The phone rang. George glanced at the screen. It was Eleanor calling. He pressed a button on the steering wheel, and his wife's voice came through the speakers. Gio, today is the 50th birthday of Mrs. Peterson, the chef at the restaurant on Kromskaya. Please buy a bouquet and congratulate her on our behalf. Eleanor spoke quickly, with business-like clarity. All right, he replied curtly and hung up. George didn't love his wife. He was embarrassed by her and tried not to appear anywhere with her, except for close family events. He treated Eleanor like an old, loyal, but unfortunately unattractive friend. Eleanor was older, preferred clothes in calm tones, comfortable, made of natural fabrics, wore modest makeup, and never dyed her hair. However, she had a sharp mind and managed to become a successful businesswoman by the age of 30. They met when 20-year-old George, who had just arrived from the provinces, came to apply for an administrator position in her newly opened restaurant. It was then that he realized that by attaching himself to Eleanor, he could get a firm footing in life, which he did with brilliant success, becoming first the executive director of her chain and then the owner's husband. Only after several years did his true nature begin to assert itself. George was lucky. Nature had generously endowed him with the best a man could have in appearance. Broad shoulders, a strong chin, tall stature, a dazzling smile. Without female attention next to his gray, unattractive wife, he began to wither, and then decided he shouldn't deny himself the company of young, long-legged, appetizing beauties. These whims changed from time to time, and George didn't take anyone seriously. He carefully hid his escapades from his wife and successfully used her labor, money, and position. And George didn't care at all what anyone thought about it. The main thing was that his wife remained calm. 7 years passed like this. A flower shop appeared up the street. Deciding not to put things off, Gio turned on his signal and pulled into the nearest parking lot. He figured a standard bouquet of 30 carnations would be quite enough for the chef. The shop door jingled against the Asian wind chimes that made pleasant tinkling sounds when they touched each other. Inside, besides the florist, there was another customer. She was meticulously examining expensive orchids and large white roses. And Gio was looking at the girl with a little too much interest, for a few moments even forgetting why he had come in the first place. He was jolted out of his reverie by the florist's voice. "Young man, do you need help?" "Ah, yes, I'd like a bouquet for a 50th birthday, for a woman." George quickly composed himself, his eyes still on the attractive customer. "Relative? Mother?" the florist clarified. "No, a colleague. Nothing excessive, a formal congratulation," Gio replied dryly and nodded towards the lilac chrysanthemums. The florist sighed for some reason and began wrapping the flowers. A slender, petite brunette, long hair, blue eyes. Too beautiful to pass by. He would regret it later. Gio imagined a pleasant scene for a moment, and his chest warmed pleasantly. "These are the best roses, white angel variety," he said, finding himself behind the girl. "You only give these to loved ones." The stranger turned around and her gaze swept over Gio's business suit and the car keys in his hand. It always worked. There were so many women in the world now craving male beauty that a man possessing it had the sweetest choice. "You know about flowers?" the girl asked, adjusting her hair coquettishly. "I know who they should be given to." George smiled dazzlingly, revealing his even teeth. "Oh?" The girl raised an eyebrow, as if issuing a challenge. "And what flowers would you give me?" Gio realized he was facing a girl with character. His excitement only flared stronger. He smiled again and turned to the florist, who was just finishing wrapping the chrysanthemums. "Please, 21 more white roses from the ones the young lady was choosing." He readily took out his wallet from the inside pocket of his jacket. Under the stranger's astonished gaze, they walked out together, carrying 30 carnations. An unexpected companion with a bouquet of white roses. "Do you give such bouquets to all girls when you meet them?" she asked with a smile. "No," the man put away his wallet. "You're the first." The girl's cheeks flushed at the undisguised flattery. "And I hope you won't refuse me dinner tonight?" George asked as if he already knew the answer. "I won't refuse." She extended her hand to him. "Chloe." Gio kissed the extended palm, looking into her eyes. "George, Sauvignon Restaurant, 8 in the evening. I might be a little late. I think that's permissible on a first date." George paused for a second, simulating thought. "See you tonight, Chloe." "See you tonight, George." He walked to the car, got behind the wheel, and started the engine. All this time he watched the girl. The suit, the car, and the charm worked flawlessly. Gio winked at himself in the rearview mirror and drove out of the parking lot. By evening, the young lady would be completely languid from her own dreams and would agree to anything, although she was too beautiful to be limited to one evening. It had been a while since he'd had a long affair. Who knew? Maybe the time had come. He had considered where to invite her, which restaurant. But then he reconsidered and chose the one 2 streets away, so he wouldn't have to bother with the drive. Chloe, as she had warned, was 20 minutes late. But she arrived in a skirt with such a slit that Gio felt hot. Dinner quickly made it clear that they were both adults. "I want to say right away." Gio twirled a glass of amber whiskey in his hands. "I'm married, but I don't love her. And anyway, it was done for formality." Chloe looked at him carefully over her glass of dry red wine, taking a sip. "You know, I'm not ready to settle down at home and delve into domesticity either." She ran the tip of her finger along the thin stem of the glass. "We both understand what we want from each other. And your wife doesn't bother me at all." He didn't hear that often. Usually his flings started with regrets, reproaches, sometimes even hysterics with demands. He quickly sent such women sailing. A toy is a toy precisely so it doesn't tell its owner what to do, but accepts his rules. Dinner ended at a hotel. Both got what they wanted from each other. Gio didn't stay the night. He went home, promising to call in a few days. Left alone, she didn't regret what had happened at all. Moreover, she realized she had hooked a big fish, and that showing too much character now was maximally disadvantageous for her. She needed to be a gentle kitten for a while. And then he would start staying the night, and he would divorce his wife. "Patience, Chloe, only patience," she told herself, looking at the shadow from the nightlight. "Handsome, smart, wealthy. It's worth putting in the effort here." Eleanor collapsed onto the living room sofa, exhausted. Today she had been on her feet since morning. She had visited suppliers, looked for an accounting error, conducted an interview with a new chef, ordered cutlery. When you own a chain of restaurants, there's almost no time to rest. Something comes up every day. Eleanor understood this when she plunged into the catering industry. However, she loved her work with all her heart. She had trained as a chef herself, then quickly finished personnel management courses, worked for almost 9 years in an elite restaurant, and knew this field inside and out. And then, with the sale of her grandmother's apartment, she started her own business and in the same year met her future husband, George. The woman didn't think long. She agreed to the proposal because there was no time to be picky about suitors. She had spent the years other girls spent dating on building her business and working. George was handsome, and Eleanor was flattered that he chose her. Soon her husband proved that he also had a good business acumen, and Eleanor made him the manager of her chain of establishments. Malicious tongues whispered that George was a gigolo, but the woman didn't believe it, or didn't want to believe it, or she didn't have time. Eleanor's mind was amazingly capable of planning, distributing, evaluating, and forecasting everything related to her business. But in matters of the subtle science of love, the woman remained completely illiterate. By some miracle, Eleanor didn't make her husband a co-owner of the chain, despite being charmed by his charisma. She looked at the clock. It was just past 11. There was a commotion in the hallway. "You're late today, too." Eleanor came out into the corridor, greeting her husband. "Yes?" George nodded curtly, taking off his jacket. There were problems with the new uniform for the waiters. It took a long time to sort out. "Oh, that seamstress," Eleanor sighed. "Always letting us down." "Don't say it." George pecked her briefly on the cheek and went into the room to change. "Did you have dinner? I brought something from the mini banquet for Mrs. Peterson's birthday." 10 minutes later, they sat down at the large table in the luxurious kitchen. Eleanor couldn't remember the last time she had cooked something substantial here herself. Usually, they had a quick breakfast like coffee and waffles or scrambled eggs, ate lunch at work, and ordered dinner delivery. There were too many things to fit a couple of hours of cooking into. Although Eleanor loved the culinary craft and had once taught the head chef of her first restaurant how to properly braise meat and how to turn any tomatoes into Bakinskis, an experienced observer would immediately notice how Gio's peacock tail seemed to dim next to Eleanor, how he suppressed with effort everything that was so vibrant with his numerous mistresses. His gaze became gray, his movements quick but constrained, his smile politely strained. At first, Gio tried to be expressive around his wife, but quickly realized that she was not capable of giving him what other girls did. He chose a different tactic. Rarely appear at home, give token gifts once a month, be polite, and never argue. "Maybe we could watch one episode of that series," Eleanor suggested. "Ellie, I'd love to, but I'm dead on my feet. My eyes are already closing. I managed to drive home safely." Gio excused himself, simultaneously yawning dramatically and rubbing his eyelids. The woman sighed. She knew they had both been on their feet all day, but she had hoped for a miracle. After all, a woman's soul unconsciously craved romance, to snuggle up next to her beloved husband, pull a blanket over them, and fall asleep watching a favorite movie. George rinsed his plate and went to shower. By the time Eleanor reached the bedroom, he was already asleep. The woman lay down beside him and hugged her husband. The pillow quickly carried her off to sleep, too. "Mr. Alexander, there's a guest asking for you in the dining area." Daisy, a waitress, peeked into the mini office where Gio was handling all the restaurant's paperwork. "Something wrong?" The man lifted his head from his laptop. "No, nothing. She said she's a friend of yours." Daisy seemed shy for some reason. Very subtly and discreetly, but Gio noticed. He always noticed how women trembled if he paid them attention, especially young provincial girls. Gio subconsciously evaluated all the female employees who came for interviews and, again subconsciously, hired only those he found attractive. Gio liked Daisy. It was pleasant to watch her work. "I'll be down in a moment," the executive director of the restaurant replied, after a pause. Gio straightened his jacket and went into the dining area. At a table for two by the window, Chloe was settled in a chair with the grace of a panther. She smiled radiantly at him and half rose in greeting. The man was pleasantly surprised and sat down opposite her. "How are you?" Chloe took a sip of coffee with an innocent smile. "What are you doing here?" "I missed you," the girl replied, batting her eyelashes even more innocently. "It was easy to tell which restaurant you owned from the photos on your account. So, here I am." Gio was restrained in his admiration and quite unrestrained in his examination of his mistress. Chloe definitely knew how to present herself to best advantage. Today she wore tight trousers, shoes, and a bright, fitted white blouse that emphasized her long, dark hair. "Daisy, bring the guest a tiramisu on the house," Gio instructed, passing by the waitress. "Mr. Alexander, you are so generous," Daisy purred, insinuatingly at the same time. Gio unconsciously swelled with pride. Anyone who says only women like receiving compliments is lying. It works for both sexes. "I thought I should invite you somewhere myself today," the girl continued, scooping foam from her coffee with a spoon. "Go on," Gio placed his palm on the table. "Tonight there's a production of Woe from Wit at the theater. I think a cultural evening wouldn't hurt after yesterday's fire." Chloe smiled with the corner of her lips and raised an eyebrow expressively. "Only, I'm afraid I don't have a suitable outfit for going to a place like that." "You?" He himself had been thinking of calling his mistress in the evening. And here was such initiative, as if she had read his mind. And Gio liked initiative in beautiful girls. This smoothed over the fact that she was asking for a gift. The man smiled back at Chloe mysteriously, took out his smartphone, made a couple of movements, and the sound of a bank notification for tickets rang out. "I've taken care of the tickets." He put the device back in his inside pocket. "And you take care of the outfit." Chloe leaned across the table and pecked Gio on the cheek. "And now I must excuse myself. Work awaits." George stood up from the chair. "See you tonight and enjoy your rest, as we say." He winked at Chloe goodbye and left. She waited until her lover disappeared and quickly glanced at her smartphone screen, nodding to herself with satisfaction. Chloe began to eat the dessert that had been brought, piece by piece. At the same time, she put the phone to her ear. "Were you doubting me? These trousers work wonders." "Uh-huh, we're going to the theater tonight. Of course," Sophie whispered. "Just passing through." Listening to guest conversations was part of Daisy's routine workdays. A month passed. If at first Gio allowed himself to see his mistress only during breaks and on days off, soon she consumed all his space and settled deep inside, where the man usually didn't let girls for entertainment. Chloe changed, adapting to his mood, but in any form, she was invariably beautiful. She said what he wanted to hear, admired him, and this only fueled his interest further. Next to her, he was bright, charismatic, generous, gallant. Next to Eleanor, uniform, calm, homogeneous, blandly simple, with an imprint of business on his face. They went to museums, exhibitions, various events together, even once went to a country retreat, and went shopping. "Looks like someone's fallen in love," Sophie sprawled on the sofa in Chloe's tiny apartment on the outskirts of the city. "And that someone isn't me," her friend chuckled. "Is it good with him?" "It would be good with anyone if they have money and looks. As usual, you don't talk much about yourself, you don't invite me over." Sophie took a candy from a vase on the shelf. "I tell him what I need to for now. Wedding organizer, I love Mediterranean cuisine, European culture, and quality clothes. He doesn't need to know about the rented apartment and my past romances. Chloe swung her leg, sitting on a chair nearby. The goal is to steal him from his wife, and then we can talk about other things. There, Chloe. You know how to charm men. Sophie stretched. My ideal option is in the flower shop. Believe me, maybe yours is waiting for you in the deli section of the grocery store in line. Sophie burst out laughing. The girl remained silent. Well, come on, as usual. Sophie shrugged, chewing another candy. Let him take you on vacation or buy you an expensive ring. Vacation is a bit early yet. Chloe shook her head. A little later, when he's ripe. Divorce him, darling. If you drag your feet like this, he'll never ripen. Sophie stood up from the sofa and put her hands on her hips. You need to state your position. Let's at least get those shoes, remember? That fits. Chloe looked at her friend slyly. Get ready. Let's go try on the shoes. That's the spirit. Sophie gave her a thumbs up and began looking for her handbag nearby. Eleanor was reviewing documents, sitting in the car next to her husband. They had been running errands in the city together since morning. Traffic jams, calls, urgency. Eleanor knew how to calmly endure all this. Experience had taught her. But George didn't like such hustle and bustled and got nervous, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. And he also complained about the increase in purchase prices over the last month. Meat has soared, especially beef. What have they come up with? Raising prices in the middle of summer. Cows have tons of food growing. Gio grumbled. Vaccinations, grain, fuel, electricity, Eleanor listed calmly, without even looking up from her papers. One thing grows, another grows. For now, we're managing, and we'll keep the prices on dishes the same. Guests are used to our conditions. We'll raise them if there's another 20 or 30% markup on meat. But we'll earn less, Gio objected. We'll observe for now, the woman replied. Gio didn't give up. Seafood has also jumped. Everything is getting more expensive. Maybe we shouldn't buy a new freezer instead of keeping prices the same. The freezer is needed, Gio, Eleanor objected. The old one broke twice, and the chef's preparations spoiled to a considerable sum. George was figuring out where else he could find a flaw and how to cover his expenses. In reality, meat and seafood were indeed getting more expensive, but not as much as he had described. Gio understood that his beautiful mistress was costing him more and more, but he couldn't help himself. He wanted to be with her, to spoil her. George's phone pinged, notifying the owner of a message in a messenger app. For some reason, Eleanor's eyes darted to the device. A notification hung on the screen. Photo. George picked up his smartphone and quickly looked at the received message, as quickly as he could, and with as calm a face as he could manage. But Eleanor still noticed his eyebrow twitch, and how a frame with a woman's high-heeled shoes flashed in the screen's reflection on the glass. Inside her, an unpleasant, unfamiliar, but very understandable feeling scratched. With an effort of will, Eleanor suppressed it, but the cold snake of suspicion had already slithered further down her back, chilling her with icy needles. Something important? The woman asked her husband casually. Someone sending jokes in the work chat, Gio replied, watching the traffic light at the turn carefully. Eleanor nodded somewhat distractedly. Passed. They arrived at the restaurant to sort out work issues. Eleanor was bombarded with questions by the chefs. George immediately escaped to the terrace to call someone. You're sending me photos at a slightly inconvenient time. He tried to make his voice confident, as if trying to playfully scold. I thought your wife didn't poke her nose into your phone, Chloe noted softly on the phone. Stung by this softness, George quickly composed himself. No, my space belongs to me, but there are times when awkward situations happen. He leaned against the railing. Do you want to buy these shoes? They match my new handbag so well, Chloe drawled. It would be a huge oversight not to get them. Besides, I'll look even brighter next to you in them. Gio swallowed, already picturing the shoes on his mistress's slender legs. Beauty, female magic, was doing its work. All right, I'll expect you in them tomorrow. Without hanging up, Gio went into his online bank and sent the necessary amount to Chloe's card. Is that enough? Yes, of course, thank you, kitten. The girl purred into the phone. Pleasure cost money, and whose money went to these whims was a secondary matter. Eleanor also came out onto the terrace, exhausted by staff questions. Her head was buzzing with the abundance of information, but outwardly the businesswoman remained as calm as ever. Gio, I think we've been working so much lately, she approached her husband. Let's go somewhere? Ellie, I'd love to, but I've already promised to go out of town with the guys. Mike bought a new car, wants to celebrate. Gio shrugged nonchalantly. I know you don't like his company, so I didn't even invite you. Eleanor sighed. The excuse was perfect. She really didn't like Mike, her husband's friend. Well, if you're busy, she smiled thinly. I hope you have a good time. Gio smiled broadly, put his hand on her waist, and together they went inside the restaurant. Dinners and breakfasts with her mother were a pleasant tradition for Eleanor. They had started a long time ago, and over the years had grown from scrambled eggs and cocoa in the home kitchen to full-fledged outings to the most beautiful and interesting establishments. In essence, it was her mother who instilled in Eleanor a love for the catering industry and played a significant role in who her daughter became. This time, Eleanor chose an Italian bistro with small, cozy tables and checkered tablecloths for dinner. They often changed locations, but Eleanor never invited her mother to her own restaurants, considering it something of a bad omen. By the appointed time, her mother still hadn't arrived. Eleanor looked for the Mini Cooper but didn't find it. Her mother, despite her age of 64, was a lively, energetic, and peculiar lady who had retained a youthful spark. 10 minutes later, the waiter placed a teapot and cups before Eleanor and served the cutlery. The phone rang. Ellie, please forgive me. I won't be able to make it. Her mother's voice was filled with apologetic notes. The neighbor's dog got sick. She rushed it to the vet and asked me to sit with her granddaughter. You wouldn't leave a small child unattended, would you? I'm sorry, dear. Again. Well, if that's the case, what can you do? Eleanor sighed. Call Gio. Let him fill in for me, her mother suggested on the other end. I'll call, the woman agreed curtly. Wishing Spotty Tamara Petrovna good health. Bye, Mom. Eleanor hung up. She wasn't exactly upset, but something close to it. It happens when you go to the store for one thing and end up buying something completely different or nothing at all. Initially, the evening was supposed to be spent with her husband, then with her mother, and in the end, she was sitting alone at the table, waiting. The waiter placed a dish of pizza on the table and wished the guest a pleasant meal. It was too late to leave or refuse. Eleanor decided to enjoy her own company, looking out the window. Who would have thought that, being a successful businesswoman and a married woman, one could feel so lonely? Good evening. Excuse me for bothering you, but you look very much like my childhood friend, a voice suddenly said nearby. Eleanor turned around and saw a vaguely familiar man talking to her. And you look very much like my childhood friend. Eleanor laughed, recognizing the guest. He raised his eyebrows, but then smiled too. Eleanor, I haven't mistaken you, have I? May I sit down? Of course, Jack. Wow, the man commented. How long has it been since we saw each other? 20 years? More, since you were transferred to serve in the Far East, Eleanor clarified. And now I'm a retired policeman. Jack folded his hands on the table. And I decided to move closer to my historical homeland. How are you? So many years have passed. Amazing. And so began conversations and questions, discussions, and laughter. Eleanor had grown up with Jack in the same courtyard. He was 2 years older than her. All their childhood they climbed into other people's yards together, built huts, baked potatoes in the ashes, and dreamed of growing up quickly. In school, Eleanor studied diligently, while Jack got bumps and bruises, grew up, and went into the army by the time she graduated. Their bond was strong, and Eleanor was not to be offended, whether in the 1st grade or the 10th. Otherwise, Jack would quickly rearrange the noses of the offenders. I trained there in Vladivostok, went to work in the police, became an investigator. I saw so much during that time. Now I've come here and I'm thinking about what a brave pensioner like me should do. Jack finished his story cheerfully. It was written on your forehead that you'd wear a uniform. I'm not even surprised. Eleanor's mood noticeably improved. Meeting an old friend was that pleasant event, that spark of joy that was so necessary. And in that case, you should either bake pies or make others bake them, Jack replied in kind. Confess, you're in charge of someone, aren't you? Only 3 head chefs, 24 waiters, and a modest restaurant. Eleanor stirred her tea with a spoon. Well, I'll be. Jack was genuinely amazed. So, we both became what we wanted? Looks like it, Eleanor agreed. What's wrong? Jack noticed her distant gaze. Are you upset about something? Eleanor hesitated. She didn't want to complain about her empty suspicions, but the feeling of the icy snake hadn't left her since that moment in the car. In the end, the woman, choosing her words carefully, described the subject of her concern to her friend. Jack furrowed his brow. His face lit up with an idea. How about I keep an eye on your husband? I'm retired anyway, plenty of time. And I'll get to know the city properly at the same time, he suggested quite casually. That feels wrong somehow. Eleanor looked at the man doubtfully. What if he realizes he's being followed? Jack smiled broadly. Have you forgotten who I am? Surveillance and data collection were my professional duties for many years, and I must say, I performed them impeccably. Jack, you're growling! Eleanor hissed in a dry voice, and then burst into loud laughter, unintentionally amusing Jack. Everything will be done, comrade investigator. Can I just finish dinner? She took the last piece of pizza from the dish. They chatted for a long time, ordered a second pot of tea, and then dessert. The planned dinner turned out to be quite unplanned. By the end of summer, Chloe had gotten used to the well-fed and comfortable life with George. Like many girls from the provinces, she came to the capital to study, but along the way, she realized she had chosen the wrong profession. Thus, by diploma, Chloe was a bank employee, but in fact, she was engaged in designing spaces for various celebrations, mostly weddings. This occupation brought the girl not only good dividends, but also useful connections. Chloe quickly began to view relationships as a way to climb and get rich. She disdainfully threw fairy tales about love and paradise in a hut into the mental garbage can. Who needed this love when money had long decided everything in the city? And she saw confirmation of this at the weddings she designed, where girls married wealthy, established, and educated men. Exceptions, of course, occurred, but rarely. Chloe believed that love would invariably appear if your husband had a good income and respect. And his appearance played almost a secondary role here. But no matter how her brain convinced her, the craving for beauty crept from the depths. Why did Chloe latch onto George? She had hit the jackpot she had always secretly hoped for. Neither his wife nor other aggravating circumstances bothered her. Take everything you can, the girl said. Like-minded people for this position were found very quickly. At one of the weddings, Chloe met Sophie, one of the bridesmaids. The talkative, cheerful gossip liked Chloe, and soon they started spending time together. Sophie also came from the provinces and dreamed of getting a good position at someone else's expense. True, for now, all her positioning was limited to working in a mid-range boutique and living with her aunt. Over time, the girl got herself in order. But if Chloe managed to quickly uproot her provincial nature, Sophie failed, and it occasionally showed in her manners and speech. That's why only men who caught this clung to her, the same provincial bandits or conquerors of the capital living in dormitories. Sophie was angry. Chloe laughed. She herself was luckier. As in any fishing, large fish take the bait less often than those who want to resemble them. At 25, Chloe already had experience with a government official, the owner of a bath complex, a successful photographer, and a titled athlete. Only none of these relationships managed to reach the coveted trap on her finger. The official was also married. The businessman for some reason said he would marry the girl his parents approved of. But Chloe wasn't discouraged. During the relationships, she managed to extract everything useful for the future. "It's time to hint to your George about a joint vacation," Sophie drawled, yawning. "It's the velvet season now, the perfect time for trips to the sea." "Agreed," Chloe nodded. "I was thinking about it myself." "What's there to think about? You're already covered in gifts." Sophie dramatically waved her hand towards her. "He gave you earrings, bought shoes, ordered a dress. You've already been to all the decent establishments. What else are you waiting for? Throw Eleanor overboard." They were sitting on an elegant bench in the shade of spreading trees on the embankment. It was stuffy. Chloe fanned herself with a hastily grabbed promotional booklet from a promoter. Sophie wanted to advise more and better. Lately, she had been passionately hanging on Chloe's every word about her relationship with George, egging her on. "I'd demand the Maldives right away." "Do you think I should?" Chloe suppressed a note of doubt in her question. "Of course, friend. You've been seeing each other for 2 months. With his means, he could have figured it out himself by now. He drives a Lexus, but the thought of taking his lady on vacation hasn't crossed his mind." Sophie tapped her bent finger on her forehead. "You should enlighten him." "Maybe you're right," Chloe drawled. "I'm tired of it here. I want a change of scenery, to warm my bones, get a tan without a solarium, and my branded swimsuit is lying idle." "A friend wouldn't give bad advice," Chloe immediately agreed. She suggested George go on vacation together. That would be 7 to 10 days. She needed to come up with an excuse to present to his wife without causing pain. And she also needed to figure out where to scrape together the extra money for this vacation. It was one thing to be out of the house in the evening or give a mistress earrings, and another to slip away for a week's vacation costing a couple of $100,000. Inside Geo, 2 voices were fighting. One, adventurous, urged him to spit on everything and give Chloe the trip. And the second, meticulous, calculated the risks. "You should have divorced and been taking girls around the world, not sitting under anyone's heel," the first thought raged. "Yeah, divorced and left to pick up crumbs? You should have told her long ago to put something in your name," the second sneered. Ideally, George wanted to catch 2 birds with 1 stone. Live comfortably without trying too hard, and date a beautiful mistress while having a wife. But as the years passed, the role of the second became burdensome for Geo. Although few people knew about it, their formal, dry relationship with his wife would only be unnoticed by someone blind. "You can't divorce Geo," he muttered. "But nobody else needs to know that." Right. But the vacation adventure will have to be cancelled and smoothed over with something." The man incidentally remembered that in September, the restaurant he was responsible for had a lot of work and banquets planned. Flying away at such a moment was maximally risky. Eleanor might suspect something. But Geo didn't want to argue with Chloe either. "We'll find a compromise." George looked at his reflection in the glass door and smirked. Beneficial for its initiator, of course. Eleanor strolled leisurely through the restaurant hall, observing the fruit of her labor. The woman watched over it with tenderness and care, like a growing child who brought her certificates, good grades, and medals from school. Eleanor was distracted from her pleasant contemplation by a phone call. "Hello, Ellie. I have the full report on the work done." Jack's voice was as relaxed as ever, but at the same time he was trying to hide something. "Hello, Jack." Eleanor's heart hammered loudly under her shirt. "Do you want to discuss this now?" "I think so." Jack sighed somewhat strainedly. "The information is interesting, if that's the word. I'm parked nearby, on the corner of the street." "Okay, I'll be right there." Eleanor hung up. An unpleasant pang tightened in her chest, and sweat broke out on her back. Why had she agreed to this adventure at all, knowing what might surface? Perhaps she didn't want to believe or was afraid. It was ridiculous in her position. Eleanor composed herself, clenched her hands into fists, exhaled, and pushed the door open to the street. She found Jack in his car. He was thoughtfully examining something on his smartphone screen. When Eleanor got into the passenger seat, the man placed the device face down on his knee. "I won't keep you in suspense," Jack began without ceremony. "I didn't observe George constantly, but what I managed to see and record over a month was enough." Eleanor swallowed. Jack picked up his smartphone and handed it to her, first turning on the screen. The photo that appeared showed George sitting in a cafe with a young brunette, not in a friendly way at all, whispering something in her ear. "At the Bohemia Cafe," Jack prompted. Eleanor raised her hand, her icy finger tracing the screen. In the next frame, George was kissing the same girl in his car. The photo was taken through the windshield, but the professional hand of the former policeman had captured the shot so that there was no doubt about who was in it. There were several more pictures after that, but they all spoke eloquently of the same thing. "So, a mistress," Eleanor stated in a harsh, unfamiliar voice. "Here it is, the truth I refused to believe." "I'm sorry, Ellie," Jack brightened, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I tried to remain impartial in such moments, but I can't. You're not just another person filing a report." "Did you find out who she is?" "Of course." Jack opened a folder with other photos on his smartphone and began to scroll through them for Eleanor. Chloe Streletskaya, 25 years old, from out of town, works as a wedding decorator, and also a professional capital city charmer of wealthy men. Eleanor carefully examined the photos of her rival. Slender, long-haired blue eyes, stylish clothes. Her complete opposite. And very young, too. "And how long have they been at it?" Eleanor asked, gathering her strength again. "From my observations, a little over 2 months," Jack drawled. "The motive here is more than clear. She needs a rich man. He needs—" Jack hesitated, carefully searching for words. "You don't have to be delicate," Eleanor finished the sentence. "He needs someone younger and prettier. Deep down, I've known for a long time that a handsome man like Gio couldn't be with me out of great love. I'm not a fool either, and I understand what attracted him initially. Only I never stopped loving him because of it. And I should have." The woman's lips trembled, her eyes stung, and the pain was felt through all walls. Eleanor wiped away the tears that had welled up with the back of her hand, sniffing. Jack involuntarily began to comfort her. "Ellie, your husband is a poser and almost a gigolo. Don't you dare blame yourself for anything. Besides, that's not all I found out." "What?" Eleanor stared at him in astonishment. "What do you mean, not all?" Just like that. Jack conspiratorially narrowed his eyebrows for some reason. It seems both lovers are playing their own game and think no one suspects anything. In essence, that's true. Only I burst out laughing when I realized what was what. Eleanor looked at him in bewilderment. Instead of explaining, Jack showed her something else on his smartphone. Eleanor carefully examined the picture. I don't understand anything. Does he have two of them? She furrowed her brow. That's what I didn't get at first either, Jack nodded. It seems your husband wants to have everything everywhere at once. Jack leaned towards her and began to explain something, folding his fingers and drawing diagrams. And Eleanor laughed. Absurdly, foolishly, and completely inappropriately. But she laughed. What should I do in this situation? She asked the former investigator after all the discussions. Act as usual, unperturbed, Jack said. Let everything take its course, and I'll continue to gather information so you can do everything beautifully in the end. I hope, by the way, you're not thinking of forgiving him? Absolutely not, Eleanor shook her head categorically. I have finally faced my fear, and now I don't intend to be dependent on it. This is my life. I'll send you all the photos, but just don't start a showdown prematurely. He's a jerk, I understand, but the matter needs to be seen through to the end. You won't lose anything legally in a divorce, right? And he'll get almost nothing. So let's at least get him for the triumph of justice. He hugged Eleanor in a friendly way and gently shook her. She composed herself, smiled, thanked her friend for his work, and got out of the car. Why aren't we flying? Chloe wrinkled her nose capriciously. George sat opposite her in a soft armchair on the terrace of a fashionable bistro. Boats and ships sailed by on the river nearby, the wind blowing cool from the water's surface. Understand, I can't just drop everything and fly away in September. Gio showed her the restaurant hall booking list for a month ahead. I can't now, but I promise we'll come back to this issue in the future. I was already set on the sea and sun. Chloe continued to be capricious on principle, although she perfectly understood the real reason for her lover's refusal to travel. His wife, and only his wife, prevented them from enjoying the vacation and each other. He could talk about busyness, about plans, but for the first time, the lover's wife began to genuinely irritate Chloe. Gifts and time were no longer enough. She wanted to be the sole owner. Sophie was constantly egging her on. You can only dream of a well-fed and settled life with another, darling, her friend said. You need to vacate your comfortable seat sooner. I brought you something to brighten this situation. George reached into his pocket. He placed a beautiful box on the table and nodded invitingly, suggesting she open it. Chloe took the gift with interest and found a ring with a large transparent stone in the box. Oh, is this an engagement ring? She examined the jewelry, its facets sparkling in the sunlight. Let's say so. George contemplated the girl's joy and delight at the gift. He liked this feeling. He was energized by it. So, you're proposing to me? She put the ring on the ring finger of her right hand. Let's assume that. George smiled mysteriously, folding his hands over his stomach. But you're still married. Chloe looked at him insinuatingly. I know, and I promise I'll resolve that issue. George replied evasively and confidently at the same time. It seemed this answer satisfied Chloe completely, as she kept admiring the stone in the ring and had already sent several photos to her friend in their chat. Of course, not to boast about such a gift would be foolish. George understood that he couldn't postpone the moment forever. Divorce from Eleanor would be disadvantageous for him in every sense, so sooner or later the affair with Chloe had to end, unless she ultimately swallowed the fact of his marriage. Chloe pressed gently but often, and Gio understood why. Many of their plans were ruined because of Eleanor. Anyone would start to get annoyed. That same evening, Chloe was walking home from her workout, a gym bag slung over her shoulder. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Sophie was relentlessly praising the ring and raving about George's impeccable taste. Did he tell you clearly that he'll divorce? She asked. Almost, Chloe confirmed. Almost, friend, doesn't count, Sophie noted. Either it's a clear answer, or he's leading you on. No dates, no action plan. What is this? Are you suggesting you brainwash him with this question every time you meet? Sophie bent down to tie her shoelaces. I suggest you go to his gray little wife yourself and put a big fat period on their family history, Sophie stated emphatically. Otherwise, it'll be like with that politician. Let your Gio get angry, but you need to nip it in the bud. So, cut it off? Chloe grunted doubtfully. She had never done that, but she had played out similar scenarios in her mind more than once. Yes, of course, cut it off, Sophie confirmed heatedly. There's no other way out here. Can we go together? No, he's my man. And who am I supposed to be afraid of there, Sophie? Chloe remembered George's unattractive legal wife. An old gray mouse? Please. A couple of phrases will be enough to make her cry. I still don't understand what keeps them together at all. Beautiful people should be with equally beautiful people. It's about time, friend, Sophie supported her. Go and demand what's yours from someone who clearly got him by mistake. Having finished these loud speeches with mutual laughter, the girls said goodbye at Chloe's doorstep. She quickly slipped into the shower, feeling combative and at the same time planning what to wear to her lover's wife's place to emphasize the difference between them even more. The doorbell rang after lunch, catching Eleanor by surprise. That day, she had decided to work from home and had been sitting at her laptop in the kitchen since morning. Gio had left to prepare for a large banquet and wasn't expected back yet. Her mother hadn't warned her about a visit, and she wasn't expecting a courier either. Eleanor put down her laptop and straightened up. Her back only ached when she put on comfortable trousers and a t-shirt from her home set. The woman took a sip of her now cold tea as she walked and headed to the door. Through the peephole, standing at the door and persistently pressing the doorbell button, was her husband's mistress. Eleanor even blinked, not believing her eyes. Her mouth went dry. The woman looked carefully through the peephole again. Yes, it was true. Standing on the landing was exactly the girl from the photos Jack had given her. Eleanor took a deep breath, then exhaled, and reached for the handle. A crazy, childish thought flashed through her mind. Maybe pretend no one's home? But the woman quickly dismissed it. The latch rattled with a metallic sound. The door opened. Their gazes met. In those couple of seconds, an experienced observer would have read contempt, disdain, and disgust in the eyes of one, and vague interest, incomprehension, and strange restraint in the eyes of the other. Hello, Eleanor. I won't beat around the bush and I'll say it straight. Chloe looked Eleanor up and down with a gaze full of contempt. Your husband and I love each other, that's a fact. And he doesn't love you, and that's also a fact. So let him go nicely and give him a divorce. Eleanor overcame the initial wave of uncertainty and leaned her shoulder against the doorframe. She examined her rival. Chloe had come fully dressed and made up, clearly wanting to contrast, emphasizing her youth and vibrancy. As if Eleanor hadn't attended management courses. In her mind, the image of the mistress was replaced by the image of an arrogant, green chorus girl who had come to apply for a job. The substitution worked. Hello, Chloe. I'll agree with the second fact, as I've known it for a while now. But I would strongly dispute the first. My husband is capable of loving only himself, Eleanor said in a calm voice, looking Chloe directly in the eyes. A flicker of surprise crossed Chloe's eyes. The gray mouse wife wasn't the one who was supposed to back down immediately before her. And she knew her name from somewhere too. You're still not a match for him, and we both know that. Chloe put her mask of confidence back on. He's young, handsome, successful. Next to him should be a woman just like that, who will make him happy. Give him a divorce. The moment to get him, as Jack had said, had arrived. And who said I wouldn't give it? She said, looking intently at her rival, which clearly threw her off balance. Take Gio right now if you want. I'm even willing to let you into the apartment to pack his suitcases. Eleanor stepped back and beckoned invitingly into the hallway, Chloe hesitated, something clicked in her head. Just keep in mind that you won't get anything. The restaurant business is mine. This apartment was bought by me before the marriage. And even the car, which dear George used to impress you, also belongs to me. No, if the love is so great, I won't stand in the way. As they say with your loved one, paradise is in a hut. Eleanor shrugged. All right, I'll let him work as a waiter. Chloe was dumbfounded. The carefully planned scheme in her head collapsed like a house of cards. She stumbled back. Oh yes, I almost forgot. Eleanor took out her smartphone and showed Chloe a photo. The picture showed a familiar car and two familiar people. Gio was kissing Sophie near her house. Chloe froze, stared at Eleanor with a wild look, and began frantically pressing the elevator button. It was like a grasshopper trapped in a glass jar in the midday sun. All her confidence, mannerisms, feline grace vanished in an instant as soon as Chloe realized what an idiotic position she was in. Finally, the elevator doors opened, and the girl disappeared inside. Eleanor watched her go with triumph. Now she didn't have to pretend anymore. She could cast off the beautiful and ungrateful toy. Let such happiness go to someone else. As for her, Eleanor, she didn't need it for free. Only in the taxi did Chloe fully realize how cleverly she had been outmaneuvered. One had carefully blinded her with someone else's wealth. The other had talked her into things and pushed her in the direction she herself wanted. Inside, she was seething. Even the taxi seemed too slow. She arrived at Sophie's house. She didn't know why she had come here, what she wanted to see or find out. Chloe looked around. The painfully familiar car. The girl deliberately didn't ring the intercom and slipped into the building with one of the neighbors. She went up to the third floor and again, like an hour ago, began pressing the doorbell button. A couple of minutes later, the door opened. A disheveled Sophie in a housecoat stood on the threshold. Where is he? Chloe pushed her aside and entered the apartment without ceremony, still wearing her shoes. Are you drunk? Who? Sophie twirled a finger at her temple. Instead of answering, Chloe stared at her wildly and began having a tantrum. Did you decide to make a fool of me? Chloe reached the old-fashioned tall wardrobe in the room and flung open the doors. There was that quiet, ticklish pause. In the back of the room, among the hangers of clothes, holding shoes and trousers, stood George, looking at the two former friends with the gaze of a Chinese nodding doll. Oh, you traitor! Chloe grabbed him by the ear and dragged him into the room. George yelped, awkwardly stumbled back, then straightened up, covering his face from the blows his disgraced mistress rained down on him. The situation was worthy of a joke, a bad joke. Chloe glared furiously first at her former suitor, and then at her former friend. How? Why did you do this to me? Why do you always get everything? Sophie flared up suddenly and brightly. All the perks, all the handsome guys, all the best options. And I, like a little dog, just pick up the scraps in the form of stories about your gifts and romances. Learn to share, friend. Chloe was speechless. The one she had trusted with all her secrets, all her ideas and mysteries, turned out to be a vile rat. Now I understand everything. Chloe, her cheeks burning, slowly clapped her hands. You deliberately persuaded me to raise my demands, hoping Gio would reconsider and leave such an expensive girl. And I, like an idiot, believed it out of a sense of my own importance. And you sent me to his wife so I would make a fool of myself, and then you would come in and take everything ready-made. Sarcastic, Sophie remarked. Maybe I'm not as beautiful, but I know how to be a real person, not just wear expensive shoes and beg for another ring. Listen to problems, give advice, and you're like a plastic doll, soulless and dolled up. Chloe felt almost physically as if she had been spat on. Without fully understanding what she was doing, she jumped at Sophie and slapped her loudly. The echo spread even into the corners of the room. Sophie's head buzzed like an empty pot. In the heat of the rivals' quarrel, they didn't even notice how the hero and instigator of the whole mess quietly slipped out of the apartment through the unlocked door. Without a word, they rushed to the window and only managed to see the rear bumper of the familiar Lexus. At home, George quickly tidied himself up and took a change of suit from the hanger in his study so that nothing would remind him of the shameful position Gio had found himself in today. The adventurousness and danger that were invariably present in the situation he created excited Gio. Sophie wrote to Gio on social media and suggested meeting. Chloe had shown her his profile so often that it wasn't difficult to remember and find the man later. Sophie didn't ask to be taken to expensive restaurants. She didn't ask for gifts, but she really knew how to listen. The more Chloe asked for, the more Gio liked Sophie. And at some point, he decided, why choose someone when you can be with everyone at once? One for money, the second for cozy evenings, the third for going out and maintaining his status. Why not live like that? Gio was driving home hoping to rest from the situation he had gotten into. But today was not over yet. "Ellie, I got off early," the man said loudly, slamming the front door. "Are you home?" "Home, Gio, home," the woman replied. "I'm so tired." He entered the room, rubbing his forehead deliberately. Tired of the agonizing choice of which of the two mistresses to prefer. Eleanor looked at her husband, sitting in the armchair. George looked as if he had been doused with ice water. He tried to say something, but only something incoherent came out. "I know what you're tired of." Eleanor stood up and threw a stack of photos at his feet, where he was alternately with Chloe and with Sophie. Gio stared blankly at the pictures scattered on the parquet floor. "Did you think you were the smartest?" Eleanor walked right up to her husband. "And the proverb about the well is apparently unknown to you." Gio just looked at her silently, gradually realizing how he had messed up. "Out of the apartment by tomorrow, please." Eleanor turned to the window. "And by the way, I've already found a new manager. If the position of waiter suits you, you can stay. Otherwise, go wherever you want. I don't need a traitor husband, a cheater, and a gigolo." "Ellie, let's talk," George began, but his wife interrupted him. "Get out now. Only you leave the car keys here. Otherwise, I'll report it stolen." George realized he had played too much and outsmarted himself. The box of plenty turned out to be a trap he shouldn't have messed with. Empty, humiliated by his own bad inclinations, Gio shuffled off to pack his things. Excuses were pointless. He thought about staying with one of his mistresses, but realized that Chloe wouldn't forgive him, and Sophie didn't really need him. Rather, she just wanted to spite her friend in this way. Gio felt used and worthless. Eleanor heard him leave the living room. She felt she had won. But most importantly, she admitted to herself what she had feared and carefully ignored. It was as if a dirty curtain had been pulled away in her consciousness, and clean, bright light poured in. The first snow fell on the city like a thin veil, covering sidewalks, roofs, trees, settling on fluffy coats and red noses, hiding in bushes or landing on the tongues of curious children. Eleanor hurried to meet him. They hadn't seen Jack since September. He had then urgently gone to his older sister near Murom while she recovered from a broken leg. And now this morning, her old friend had written to her and suggested meeting. Eleanor was catching up on her driving skills. Although she knew how to drive, she preferred to take taxis or rely on her ex-husband's driving skills. But now the woman was firmly determined to steer her own life. Jack chose some inconspicuous cafe for their meeting. A plump woman in an old bonnet was frying juicy chebureks behind the cashier in the open kitchen. "This place reminds me of my grandmother's kitchen." Eleanor looked around inside with interest when she and Jack met and started talking. That's why I chose it, the former investigator smiled, following her gaze. Like in childhood, it's all atmospheric. I want something simple, understandable, warm, comforting, and hot. A cheburek? Let's do it, Eleanor nodded in agreement. 10 minutes later, they were both devouring hot chebureks. They were steaming, spitting juice, but no one was bothered. Eleanor got her hands all messy and couldn't remember the last time she felt so light and good with someone. Even restaurant chain directors have the right to a sin in the form of simple tea and good old chebureks. Near Maram, my sister has such forests, a fairy tale. Perfect for cross-country skiing on a winter morning. Jack wiped his hands with a napkin. I remember you loved to go for a run like that when you were a kid. There was more snow and frosts were more frequent when I was a kid, Eleanor remarked. But you're right. I'd love to escape here to the forest for a day. So you've agreed to go? Jack asked soulfully. I think the restaurants will manage without my supervision for a couple of days, Eleanor stretched. And I need to drive not just in the city, but on the highway too. Skills are only developed through practice. We can go today. Why waste time, right? Jack winked at her. Jack, Eleanor chewed her lips, formulating her thought correctly. Will this be a friendly trip based on warm memories, or a romantic journey with hope for something more? Jack smiled with the corners of his lips, wrinkles gathering at the corners of his eyes. That's for you to decide, the man replied. Let it be the latter, she said after a pause. Jack's hand covered her fingers on the table, tenderly, confidently, and at that moment, Eleanor thought that another chapter was beginning in her life. But in a new book,